So I'm Franny Cronenberg, and I'm the moderator of the science panel. So thanks for coming, everyone. Some of you have already heard us talking obviously in all the different forums that we've had so far. So we're going to try not to do too much repetition of some of that. We're probably going to repeat a little bit of sort of people's career paths, but then I think we're going to mix it up a little bit to make this a little more interesting, because I think we're getting tired of saying the same thing. So I think we'll maybe try to come up with some different angles to keep it interesting for people. So what we're going to do is we're just going to go down this table, and everyone's just going to give a really brief sort of statement about who they are, what they do. And then what we'll do is we'll go through some questions that I have, and then we want to definitely take some questions that you have. So as we're talking, jot down a few thoughts, and we'll take some questions at the end. Okay, sound good? All right, just a show of hands, how many are first-year students? Wow. Okay, second, sophomores? Any juniors? Wow, okay, and the seniors? Okay, cool, so first year. All right, hopefully you're not having too many specific questions. We want broad questions. All right, great. So why don't you start out at the other, we'll start at the other end. Jill, just give us sort of high level of who you are and what you do.
Sure, great. Hi everyone, my name is Jill Javier. I graduated in 2007. I was biomedical engineering here at Brown. Since there are a ton of freshmen here, I should probably say that I did not, every single day I was here doing engineering, I did not know I wanted to stick with engineering. I think what helped me was shopping an upper level course as a freshman, organ replacement, and that really helped me figure out, okay, this is actually the concentration I want to stick with. But with that said, I love doing research. It was really cool, but I wanted to not be in the lab all day, and I wanted to get closer to actually helping medical products get to the market. And so I ended up doing health economic consulting after Brown, and I did that for 5 years. I was working with different pharmaceutical, medical device companies in different therapeutic areas, so that was a really good opportunity for me. Still thought that I wanted to learn more about the business side of things, so I ended up going to business school, focusing on healthcare management. And after that, now I work at Medtronic, a medical device company, and I work in strategy and business development now. So kind of ended up going full circle, but not really. My background did help me a lot from Brown, and I think that working in strategy now is really cool because I get to help the company figure out what therapeutic areas to enter in, and whether or not we want to purchase different companies that'll actually help us get there as well. So it's a brief overview.
Hi everyone, I'm Lee Stevens. I was the class of 2012, so I'm a fairly recent graduate. So my career path has been rather short, but I was a human biology with an emphasis on conservation major at Brown, and did a lot of biology research while I was here, but I also was very interested in film and ended up sort of pursuing scientific film as my career up until this point after I graduated. So I'm currently a new media specialist at the American Museum of Natural History, which means that I'm a video producer for the YouTube channel. There are 3 of us, and between the 3 of us, we produce about 98% of all of the YouTube videos that appear on that channel. Each of us is responsible for planning, producing, shooting, editing, revising, and publishing each of our individual videos. And so I do a lot of things. You know, I'm very adept in all of the aspects of film production, but I also get to work with scientists and help the scientists at American Museum of Natural History, help them to, frame their message and talk about issues of today, and also talk about their research. In addition to that, we also make videos about the museum's current exhibitions, which also cover important science topics of today. And that's a really great way for me to frame my background in science with my passion for video and film. And so my background in science has actually helped me to understand and to empathize with scientists when they're trying to communicate their message, but also see it from the perspective of somebody in the public, and sort of translate between that and how it will look good in video and how to make the best video possible.
My name is Virginia Hughes. I'm the science editor at BuzzFeed News. I've been in this job for 3 weeks. So before that, I was an independent journalist for 9 years. I had a blog with National Geographic, and I was a contributing editor of Popular Science, and I wrote mostly for science magazines and a few general interest magazines. When I was at Brown, I was a neuroscience major, and I kind of always knew I didn't want to be a doctor, but I wasn't sure about graduate school. And what happened is I studied abroad and took a little break from science, and when I came back, I knew I didn't want to go back to the lab, so I figured I probably shouldn't go to grad school to be working in a lab. So I started taking journalism courses my senior year, and really loved it, and I went to a very short master's program in science journalism, and was a freelancer right after that. So I moved to New York and had a bunch of internships. Yeah.
I'm Shane Easter, graduated 2010. Did environmental science here at Brown. Did a lot of research, spent a lot of time in this building, actually in the basement, analyzing soil samples and doing other scientific research activities. I ended up parlaying that into a technician job at Stanford at the Global Change Research Experiment, which simulates climate change and looks at how the natural ecosystem responds in Northern California there. Figured out after about 2 years in that, well, for a variety of reasons, but for one of which was that I felt like I could make a bigger impact actually trying to solve climate change as opposed to study it. And there are a couple other reasons that played into it as well. Decided to go into clean energy, so pivoted toward a startup company, an energy efficiency software company. It's a smart thermostat company, kind of like Nest if you're familiar with Nest. And then kind of got my feet wet there in industry and what that was like. Decided to continue down that track and now work at Wells Fargo doing renewable energy investments. So I'm now in the solar investment primarily, but I also work on wind energy investments. And we basically bring the capital that's needed, the tax liability that's needed in order for those projects, big solar and wind projects all over the country to get built. So I'm excited about that role because I think we need to basically change our energy infrastructure fundamentally if we're going to solve climate change. So that's why I'm there now.
My name is Joel Schwartz. I graduated from Brown in 2008. I studied mechanical engineering, but to echo some of what Jill said, I also wasn't totally certain while I was studying engineering that that's what I wanted to do. I did a fair amount of research while I was at Brown, but my first job after school was based on an internship I had after junior year. I interned at this investment company that I ended up going to for 2 years in New York, which was interesting where the markets kind of melted. We worked at that was an alternative asset manager, mostly that did corporate loans and bonds. After being in New York for about 2 years, I started to get this itch to go back to grad school. Reconnected to an advisor I had as a senior, Trey Crisco, who's at Rhode Island Hospital. And moving back to Providence after New York City was a little daunting, but turns out that Providence is a great city to live in. So worked in this research lab in orthopedics for a total of 4 years, during which I struggled with, do I want to do a PhD, do I want to do an MD? And ultimately landed on a project where I found out that I love electrical engineering and software, and met the co-founders of the company that I'm currently at, which is a startup here in Providence where we make educational tools for kids with chronic illnesses. It's a consumer products company, and I joined to lead the supply chain, manufacturing, and then also a lot of the design and software.
Great. So I'm Franny Cronenberg. I'm a primary care physician. I graduated in 1984 and concentrated in art history. I started my education knowing that I had an interest in medical school, but also wanted to really take advantage of Brown, which, as we know, is pretty unique. So studied both, so it wasn't an either or, it was really kind of planned. Took a couple of years off between Brown and medical school, and then medical school and then residency up in Boston. I have a master's in healthcare management. I did a physician executive program in there and had took on some leadership roles over the years. Had a little excursion for 10 years in New Orleans with a few different interesting jobs that gave me exposure to different types of physician leadership roles. And just recently moved back to the Northeast, just moved back to Boston, and I'm at Mass General Hospital where I'm practicing part-time and the medical director of an internal medicine practice. So, what I thought we'd do, instead of sort of going into sort of more details about this right now, if you guys don't mind, you'll indulge me, is just take a couple of things from some of the questions that I've been hearing. If you could help the group understand who your mentors were along the way. A couple of you mentioned like key people who you connected with, and not by name, we don't need the name of the person, but how did you find your mentors? How did you find the people who helped you make a difficult decision or sort out what the options were, or opened a door for you, or introduced you? What are your tips for that? What was the way that you approached seeking a mentor? If you actively sought one, or did a relationship just develop that you realized, oh, this person is a mentor?
I don't think anything ever just falls in your lap. Like, for me, all of my mentors were my professors I took a class with and then sought out. And not all of them became mentors, but just sought out talking with a lot of people. And some of them worked out.
I think one way that I found mentors was specifically taking small classes with professors that I already knew a good deal about their background and knew that they were interested in a lot of the topics that I was interested in, and maybe even had a background in some areas that I was interested in. So I took one class where the professor was a former director of the National Zoo in Washington, and also worked extensively with like the Discovery Channel and Nat Geo. So I knew that she had a background in film and science and was, a very dedicated public person and was very interested in public outreach. And so I knew that I would have a lot to ask her about, and that even if she wasn't necessarily going to take me on as a mentee, which she actually ended up doing, but by taking that class, I knew I would have like a space to actually ask her questions after class and actually learn from her in the course of that class. So I think taking a small class with somebody that you already know is something you're interested in is a good way to open the door of like starting a conversation about how they can help you.
So I think aside from professors, I think some of my professors here have helped me find other people, whether they be Brown alums to talk to, or people who or people or places that they think I should be going to. So that definitely helped me. I think mentorship can come in all forms. You don't have to have a formal situation. I think for me it was very helpful to have a lot of Brown alums or contact them from different points in their career. So someone who you knew when you were here that's 2 years older than you, and then someone who's like 10 years older than you that has gone through other life experiences. And so I think for me, there are a bunch of people who have helped me along the way, but I think that it's important to whatever important decision you're making to also gain different perspectives too. So a lot of it's fluid.
Yeah, I think for me, it was definitely research. So I worked really closely with a professor who I'd taken a course from, and so that kind of initiated the relationship. And then I thought I was interested in his research. You go to a lot of professors when you're thinking about what kind of thesis research project you want to do, as you guys all know. And this one was really appealing. Worked with him for a year and a half, 2 years almost, doing research in his lab, and that just solidified a really strong bond. I mean, I just visited him 2 weekends ago, and I'm almost 5 years out from around now, so he just has kind of a strong bond as you can form doing research with a professor here. And I think Brown's really unique in that way, because you get these really talented research professors here, but who teach really small classes. Most of the time, those professors will land at Tier 1 research institutions, like big state schools, but here at Brown, you have access to those researchers here, and you can develop really strong relationships with them through just asking if you can participate in the research somehow, whether it's just on the side of your classes or whether it's doing a thesis research project, doing an UTRA. Those are great ways to establish rapport with a professor and to gain a mentor.
Yeah, I would say my experience echoes similar things to what everyone's already said. I feel like some of the more difficult questions more personal questions that I've been able to ask of mentors have grown out of like the longer relationships, whether it's a longer rapport with the professor or a longer rapport with colleagues that I've worked with. And in some way, the bond that you develop with someone, like I've had some colleagues who recommend the type of work I do now is we work with a lot of consultants. And then so sometimes, like recently I found one particular consultant that we really bonded over some other experience together, and he's a bit older in his career and has been through similar things in life. And so talking to him about how he managed some of the challenges I've had now is very helpful both from professionally and personally to say, okay, when you're dealing with this professionally, what is like in the correct like ethical and balance with your colleagues, and then also personally, how do you manage this while you're very stressed? Like, how do you deal with that on another level? And so those questions are, I think, for me at least, a little bit easier to ask of people who I know a bit better, or who I'm like, it kind of disarms it the longer I know someone. Kind of difficult to ask that stuff to a stranger, I guess.
I can recall there's one mentor I've had over the years who met when she was at a CEO level and just kind of was in awe of her. Thought she was just the coolest woman and the smartest woman at what she did, and said that was someone I needed to know. And basically just approached her and said, can I come talk with you? And she was very welcoming, and it speaks to the fact that when people are flattered when you ask them if they will meet with you to impart their knowledge, their experience. I mean, like we're doing, we feel it's really cool, you guys want to hear about us. But, even though it can be, in some situations, all the way up to a CEO is very willing to extend themselves in a meaningful way. If you come in, with thoughtful questions, you're prepared, you are engaging and curious. If you say, how do I get a job doing this, that might not be the kind of question they can help you with. But if you're there to learn about their journey, just like you're trying to learn about ours, people like talking about their journeys. People like talking about their experiences, and you can learn a lot from, as you know, that's why you're here. But take this example out into the world and reach out to people who are doing things that are appealing to you. You might see yourself doing that kind of job in 20 years. Well, go reach out to someone who's doing that job now and see if it's really something that appeals to you, and learn about their journey. I found that to be really helpful for me to sort things out. Let's talk a little bit about some of our challenges or failures, if you will, some of the roadblocks that we've met along the way. Sadly, I have probably the most number of roadblocks because I'm the oldest, so we're not going to start with me. We're going to start with Joel.
So I guess when I gave like a brief introduction about what I've done, I kind of glossed over the fact about how I was working in an investment company and just felt like I needed to go back to engineering, but that was a very difficult decision. Both because the feeling of unfinished work, I was in the middle of projects, we were just like the deal I was working on at the time, I put a significant amount of effort into, and so on some personal level, had a hard time walking away from the company. In addition to like other stuff, which I guess like doesn't get talked about a lot, but salary was going to be just immediately cut in half to go from New York to a research lab. And that was a pretty drastic shift. And thinking about like, what if I make what if I'm wrong? Like, what if I go to this research lab and I don't like it? I had some experience in it already, so I thought it was a pretty safe bet, but I was worried that I would be burning bridges and not being able to go backwards and thinking about this big change. So that was something that the more I talked about it with other people who could just say like, stop worrying so much, you're like 24, you don't need to freak out. That helped a lot. To get reassurance from people. And also some colleagues that I worked with when I was leaving, they were very supportive in saying like, you should go do what you want to do, and like, even if you don't know what that is, if you feel a hankering to do something, like give it a try, and if you're wrong, like, it'll still help you figure out what to do next.
So it speaks to also the other part of that is risk taking, right? So I'm going to add that to the mix. Challenges, failures, risk taking.
Sure. So yeah, there's a lot of risk taking that happens out there in the real world. So I think one of the biggest challenges I've had in my short career today was transitioning from academia, doing academic research, to working in industry and figuring out that I wanted to do that. I took a lot of conversations with various people in the research lab I was at, various grad students, PhD students, postdocs, but at the end of the day, I felt like the science of climate change is pretty much there. We understand the causes with a lot of confidence, so I wanted to try to be on the other side of the problem. So, with that in mind, went out and tried to figure out what I could do in industry, in clean energy specifically, and had a lot of challenges finding someone who'd be interested in someone like me who had no experience in industry, let alone like in clean energy specifically. At the end of the day, what I ended up having to do was really take a job that wasn't necessarily the perfect fit, just to get my foot in the door, and that did help because basically my thought process was get in the door, get a little bit of experience, because you'll learn when you go through this job interview process. Every single interview, you're going to have the same questions of like, what's your experience, and it's really hard to get in the door for that first experience in whatever industry or field you're going to go into. So got that initially at that startup company. It was a great experience, but eventually was able to leverage that into the role I'm now in with Wells Fargo, which is a really exciting role, and I'm happy to be there. But that was basically how I overcame that challenge.
I think my biggest challenge probably was at the very beginning when I moved to New York for an internship and basically started my freelance career. It was very hard to make money, and I was living in New York, and so I had a very high rent, and I was doing these internships which didn't pay very well. And really the first 2 years of my freelance career, there's a lot of, you have to make connections, and you have to start slowly, reaching out to different publishers and developing relationships. And you don't have a paycheck every 2 weeks like most people with steady jobs. You have big checks that come in spurts, and not only that, but you have to send invoices and I was basically running a small business where people don't pay you automatically. You have to chase down your money that is owed to you and chase down new clients. And so it was very overwhelming at the beginning because you just don't have that kind of flow from the get-go. So I tutored a lot. One of the really nice things about having a Brown degree is it's very easy in New York City to get tutoring gigs. You don't even have to be qualified. Especially around college application time. There's a lot of rich people with kids too. They want their kids to So yeah, I think I told people until I started this new job that I would never not be a freelancer, because I think it's most rewarding, as far as life balance. You can work from home and choose what things you want to work on, what you don't want to work on, your hours. You can, go to the gym in the middle of the day. But it did take a couple of years of kind of investment in your own company, sort of like any small business, right? You don't start making money at the very beginning. So there were some dicey months in the first year. I wasn't sure I was going to get rent together. That's probably the biggest challenge.
Can I ask you just a follow-up real quick? How did you learn how to do the business side of that?
Well, TurboTax. Honestly, if you've ever done your own, none of you have done your own taxes, but TurboTax, the first time you do your taxes for the first time, it takes you through step by step all the questions that you need, and you realize, oh shit, I didn't write down all of my business expenses all year. And so after you do it 1 year, the next year you learn how to do it. But it's just a lot of trial and error. I remember the first year I did my taxes, I underpaid by $3,000. So I got that bill 2 years later. It's what? So you just kind of make it up as you go along.
The invoice, any
looking at invoices.
Oh, that's
and-
easy. Microsoft
Okay.
Word has an invoice template, so. That's easy.
Cool. All right.
I think that one of my biggest challenges was not knowing that the job I really wanted actually existed. The job I have right now is kind of my dream job, which is weird and confusing when you're 25 because you feel like, oh crap, I've already achieved my dream job, and now what do I look forward to? But I mean, things change, so it's still like, it's an ongoing thing. But when I graduated, I knew that I wanted to try to like do science and film, but I had no idea how to do that. I didn't have very many film connections at all, and the only things that really came to mind were like Nat Geo and Discovery Channel as the major outputters for science film. And when I was trying to look into that, it turned out that most of their projects are made by sort of independent groups of like very small groups of people. And I didn't really know how to just go up to two people and be like, hey, what's up? Can I get a job at your incredibly small company that you're already running bare bones? And so I did try to do that, and a few people were like, oh, you know, we'd love to take you on as like an unpaid intern, but we can't really hire you, you know, as just sort of a random person. So it was very discouraging for a while, thinking that maybe I had like made the wrong choice and sort of going out on a limb and like trying to do this thing that I really wanted to do. I eventually landed a job at a documentary production company, not in science film. It was just, you know, history films, which for me, I felt like good enough that I actually nailed like a film job. But when I started to get restless again, I still got those feelings of, I don't know if the actual job that I want to do exists for me. And I think that if I had just sort of given up and maybe gone back to doing science or something, I think I would have been okay, but I am happy that I stuck it out and really tried to like pry open all of the possible connections and every single thing I could come up with, like maybe this company is gonna hire a video producer, maybe like this place will want somebody like me, and just trying and looking everywhere for a job, because that was how I eventually stumbled across my current job. And if I hadn't just really racked my brain about every single possibility, like had I tried this, had I looked for this, like I might not have found this job, and I might have gone on thinking that there wasn't a job that I could just get doing the thing that I love. And so I think that was a really important lesson for me, and I wish somebody would have told me that, like when I was your age, that even if you think that you have this dream job, like, and it doesn't exist, it might exist somewhere. So it's like, you shouldn't like give up on the idea that you can do the thing you want to.
Yeah, I mean, to echo that, I think my main challenge was this might sound corny, but creating your own path. So I knew I wanted to work with medical products and help commercialize those products and bring them to patients. I had assumed that was pre-med. And so all throughout Brown, I was pre-med. I come from a family of doctors, so I literally didn't know anything else. And so I think going into consulting, which I honestly didn't even know what consulting was at Brown either, going into consulting and then going to business, it was a larger challenge both internally for myself to just follow my actual passion and what I wanted to do, but also not knowing what the end goal was. Like I knew ultimately where I wanted to end up, I didn't know how to get there. And so that was both like, it took convincing for myself. I had to do research. I had to talk to a lot of Brown alums that have gone through the process of business school or going to work at a pharmaceutical company or working in medical devices or starting their own company. So gathering a lot of information definitely helped me. It's very challenging because I also had the additional barrier of having to convince my family and having to convince my friends because no one had followed the same path. Most of my friends were pre-med that ended up going to pre-med, like they didn't know what I was, like it was hard to just explain what I was going through and talking to people who have a completely different life experience, right? And so I think the thing that people fail to tell you is you're gonna get a lot of pushback with a lot of people, and people are gonna challenge you like, well, why don't you do X, Y, Z path, or why don't you do something else? But I think you need a lot of courage in yourself and what you actually want to do. And I think that's like a life lesson that I've had to learn because it's a continuous process. And it's not just, hey, what industry do I want to work in or what type of work do I want to do? It's also, what are the skills that I want to build? Do I like doing the quantitative stuff? Do I like working with people? Or do I want to sit and do one specific project per day? Like these are little things, you think that they're little things, but these are actual skills that help you figure out what jobs and what roles and what industries you want to actually work in. And so that self-reflection was very important for me, and that courage to actually pursue my passions was actually really important as well.
That's great. Gosh, I think I shared with some earlier today a story of one of my challenges, an opportunity that turned out to be a really huge challenge. In that I started a new job. I was living in New Orleans and had just finished my master's degree and had been a doctor for 12 years, and was offered a job to be a chief medical information officer of a community hospital, this 400-bed hospital that's mentioned here. And I started the job on August 1st of 2005. 4 weeks to the day was Hurricane Katrina, and we were one of the 3 hospitals that stayed open during and after the storm. A week or 2 after the storm, the woman who was the chief medical officer of the hospital walked off the job and said, "I don't want to do this." She didn't want to deal with New Orleans, and she just left for the West Coast. So the hospital CEO turned to me and said, "How'd you like to be chief medical officer?" Now, I had never been chief medical information officer before, let alone chief medical officer before, and these are both huge jobs, but chief medical officer is the hugest, next to the CEO. And I was responsible for the medical staff office, continuing education, graduate medical program that included residents and medical students. I was responsible for our care management department and all of our quality and patient safety and our employed physicians. I mean, it was enormous. And I took that job, and it was absolutely the most challenging experience of my life to learn everything I needed to learn on the job. And that part would have been enough, but there's this other part, which was that it was right after Hurricane Katrina. The region was destroyed. We had 400 of our team members, our employees, who didn't own anything but what they came to work with that day. Their homes were, sorry about that. Their homes were washed away with everything they owned. We had another 1,200 people who were displaced out of their homes. We had doctors who lost their homes and their offices. It was the most stressed environment of people who were emotionally just spent. I mean, they had nothing to go on. It was a very hard time to lead change, which was the biggest part of my job. So I have to say that was the greatest challenge that I've been through. I think a couple of folks have talked a little bit about the next question, about, particularly Jill, I'm going to pick off on a point that you just raised about learning about yourself. So it sounds like you went through, you've learned a lot about yourself over the years by making these tough decisions and sticking to your guns about what you thought you wanted to be doing with your career. I don't know if you have anything more to say on that, but I'd like everyone to kind of comment about, how the process of learning about yourself and what it is that you want to do. Because I think, particularly with a lot of first years, you kind of think you know what you want to do, but you're not sure, and you know someone who's doing it or you don't, or just wondering, how do you talk a little bit about that process of learning about what you've learned about yourself or how that happens?
I think one of the main things that I've learned over the years is you have to be okay. I'm a type A person, so you have to be okay with ambiguity. And you've got to learn how to roll with the punches. This is both like personal, professional, but sometimes you're not sure. It's the same thing with what happened to you. You're not sure what opportunities are going to come your way. Everything doesn't necessarily need to be planned out. To be honest with you, I still, we all probably go through it. We just day to day, sometimes you can't really see what you want to do longer term, or you're like, actually, I changed my mind, or actually, this isn't actually what I want to do. So I think you're going to hear it time and time again, follow your passion and follow your own path. But I think it's really about self-belief, or trying to just take the time to listen to other people or do your research and recognize that you're taking little bits and pieces from everyone. Does that sound appealing to you? Does that not sound appealing to you? And I think if you take more time to self-reflect, that it goes a long way. And trying to recognize your strengths and weaknesses earlier on. But yeah, I mean, those are the key things that I'm thinking about.
Yeah, I think that sort of just thinking about what you just said about learning your strengths and weaknesses early on, I feel like I kind of had to do that, and I probably did that at a good time with regards to science. I studied science, pretty intensively while I was at Brown, and was pretty convinced for, I'd say, like the first 2 or maybe 3 years that I was going to do science of some sort after I graduated. And it was and at the same time I was working on films and things, but I usually thought of it as sort of a hobby. And it was only when I started making films for projects that I was doing that were with science that I started to think that it was something I could even do. But it sort of was hard to admit to myself that maybe I wasn't going to be a scientist, because I'd been thinking that that was going to be something I would do for a really long time. My whole family was sort of expecting me to be a scientist. And so I think that there's a real learning moment where you have to, stand by what you want to do to yourself, as well as to people who maybe have certain expectations of you. And so I feel like even to this day, I still have to defend certain members of my family, like why I decided not to go into academic science and why I decided to do video science instead. And and it's not going to be easy, it doesn't necessarily get easier, but the more confidence you have in yourself that that's what you want to do, the easier it gets, to say it to yourself and say it to other people. Even when I was graduating, I feel like that was, I was telling some people today that I don't think I really decided that this is what I wanted to do until I actually got the job. Even as I was graduating, I was constantly fluctuating back and forth, thinking maybe I should have done science. And so I think that, it's okay to not be sure, but then eventually when you commit to something, you can stand up for what you believe in, do what you want to do and have the strength to back it up to other people.
I would say if you're trying to figure out how your personality quirks and you yourself fit into a variety, you're trying to picture yourself in a bunch of different positions. Think about the day-to-day, hour-to-hour, what that looks like. When you're talking to people about their jobs, ask them, what does your day look like? And then try to think very concretely and specifically about whether you would like that. Because most of our jobs are in the day-to-day. It's not, being a lawyer sounds prestigious and wonderful, and when you talk to lawyers about what they actually do every day, it might not match up with what you think it is. So I would say, for me, being a freelancer when I was a freelancer, it was a lot of alone time. It was a lot of being by myself and a lot of reading on a computer and a lot of phone calls with scientists. And so that's an easier thing to ask yourself, would I be good, would I enjoy this X activity, instead of vague, confusing, would I enjoy being a journalist?
Yeah, I would echo everything everyone said so far, and also say, especially for Brown students, don't overthink it. Just go out and do stuff, because that's how you learn. That's how you learn about yourself. It's not from sitting down and, at least for me personally, it's not from sitting down at a computer, typing, a 5-page, bio of my life at this point. It's no, it's getting out in the world, it's trying this job, it's trying that experience, trying research, and then taking the things, that you find you're good at, that you enjoy from each of those experiences, take the things you don't like, figure out how to minimize those in your future jobs, and just getting out there, getting experience is the best way to learn. And then, of course, there is a component of analyzing that after the fact, but I think don't overthink it, get out there, get some experiences. It's the best way I've learned about myself.
Yeah, I've absolutely found the same thing. Just to speak briefly about how that tangibly relates to what I've done. When I was an analyst at this investment company in New York, super interesting to cover a lot of different industries and constantly look into companies' financials and understand what makes them successful or not. The thing I struggled with personally was I wanted to take that and then interface with the companies and make change. And so realized that, okay, well maybe what I would really enjoy doing, I'm missing that component. So let me try to get toward that. And I took a brief break from it when I went to research, but now back into, and I never thought I'd work on children's toys. But it's being part of a team again, that same kind of work environment that I really enjoyed, working in a team on a company mission toward building a product and looking across like the different jobs I've done, seeing that ultimately I've trended back toward being part of a small team working on a project and a specific product. And I can certainly think that I don't think I'm going to be making kids' toys for the next 50 years. Like, if I think about where I'm headed next, I think about this a lot and ask myself, what do I really enjoy about what I'm doing currently? It's again the same. I really enjoy being on this kind of team. I enjoy doing this kind of work. I know that's an environment that I'd like to do, and I'll look for that type of environment in like pockets of other industries that seem appealing. But I envy people who have woken up from like when they were 12 and their compass points north and they want to go on a path. I've never had that.
I've never met anyone that had that.
Oh, really?
Does anyone actually have that?
I've met people who've lived that life. And maybe
it seems like it.
yeah.
Well, they live,
Right,
yeah,
outside.
I don't know if they're happy, but they live
Yeah, no, that's true. So I try not to overthink it, but realize that I would be happy doing many different things, but it is the day-to-day that matters a lot. And so trying to maximize like the day-to-day enjoyment while doing work that is important to me.
I think those are all really good points. I would just add that what you're doing every day, as well as what brings you enjoyment about the work. So for example, are you somebody who can deal with delayed gratification? So if you're working on something and there's no finished product, like a really cool kid's toy that teaches kids, if it's something that's going to take years in development, as opposed to a project that or a research study or something that you're going to do that's going to be very quick, and you're going to get satisfaction of a job well done, hopefully sooner. So thinking about which of those you can live with. I found for myself that primary care, while it was very gratifying immediately in terms of relationships and connections with people, the caring for patients is very prolonged. It's over many, many years. So there's a sort of a delayed gratification, if you will, to that. I'm not always curing a disease or I'm certainly not cutting anything out of anybody. So I'm not performing those immediate gratification kinds of activities. And I found that I was somebody who really needed some of that in my life. And I think that's probably one of the reasons why I started doing the more administrative stuff, because there were often little improvement projects that I could do that would have, a quick or sort of rapid cycle improvement, and I could see the impact of that more quickly. So for me, that gives me a balance. When I was just a hospital administrator and I wasn't seeing patients, I was missing this huge chunk of my life with this relationship part of interacting with patients. And what I came to realize was that my patients were nurturing me as much as I was nurturing them, if not more. That was a very important part that was missing during those years when I was not seeing patients as an administrator. So finding out about yourself, that insight, that reflection, to find out what is it that makes you happy about the activity, short-term versus delayed gratification, how you want to interact with people, how you want to spend your day. I think those are really, really good points, guys. That's good. Let's take it back to Brown for a second. And is there a turning point at Brown or a class at Brown that helped you the most or was most meaningful for you, that might give the group some guidance as to how you found your way? Anything about Brown in particular that you think made an impact on you in terms of your career choice or your path, or how you approached your path?
So I mentioned this before. I think that as a freshman, since a lot of you are freshmen, looking at the upper level courses just helps you figure out what concentration you want to do. So that's just very upfront. But For me, like biotech management is a specific course that helped me because I was able to be introduced to the healthcare industry and how the FDA works and what different phases of development are. So those were like very tangible things that I thought I benefited from. I think in general, there's not going to be one aha moment for you. And so I think you just need to remember that. I think that there are certain things that like help you help trigger certain parts of you, like, oh, this actually really makes sense for me, or this doesn't. But that I still feel like I have aha moments all the time too. I think at Brown, it was not the actual engineering. So engineering is great and the resources, and I told you about that, but it's also doing the other stuff that I love to do and like being well-rounded for yourself and just recognizing, well, hey, I'm still gonna take the time to just be part of Fusion or do other stuff because that's what I wanna do. And so making sure you're true to yourself in all aspects. So it's not just, hey, this is what I want to do with my career, but exactly what you were saying before, she didn't realize that her hobby was actually part of the stuff that she wanted to do. And I think those are key things that you need like to be aware of. So I think being involved in extracurricular activities and especially getting to know other people that you won't normally see in your concentration or in your classes was definitely beneficial for me.
I think that there were a lot of like people who sort of helped me along the way, like helped me sort of sort through things I was having. I had a lot of mentors at Brown, and I think going back to the mentor, question, I formed a lot of really long-lasting mentorships of people who don't necessarily work in my field, but have like advice to give me on like everything from, does my resume look okay to, how do I write an email to somebody about this other topic? And like, I think that it's not so much like a moment, but like just having a multitude of people with backgrounds that are really varying has really helped me like so much longer than I anticipated even when I started those mentorships. So maybe I started talking to a professor because I thought, hey, maybe they'll help me get like a summer job, and I still talk to them about issues that I have at work and or something to this day. And so those mentorships that you form at Brown can really help you out for years to come and really extend for a long time. So I think those are really valuable for me.
One thing I really appreciated about Brown was the flexible curriculum, obviously the open curriculum. So when my senior year, when I made this huge change, where like I had been studying neuroscience and all of a sudden I wanted to think about journalism, I created an independent study that fall with John Stein in neuroscience, and he basically just like sat down with me 3 times a week to talk about science writing. Like I kind of just made up this independent study as a way of like, I did stuff for the class, but like it was just it was a way, like time set aside for me to really study this thing that I thought I wanted to do. So I think there are lots of things in the Brown curriculum where there's lots of independent study. You just have to sell it to a dean. And there's other stuff too. There's like summer programs, and I think the curriculum here is pretty unique. And I'm sure the people in the career services could help you with stuff if you want to try something sort of out of the ordinary.
Yeah, I would say that the research experiences I had, the summer ultras, I did 2 summer ultras while I was at Brown, and those convinced me, they were so fun, they convinced me that I was definitely going to do research in my career. I think some of the realities set in later on when you're actually pursuing the career, but I think those summer research experiences that you can get here, and Brown will support you and sponsor you to work with a professor, I think can be really game-changing and really can affect what you end up doing after Brown. And I certainly feel like even though I'm not doing the exact, I'm not doing scientific research at the moment in my career, I certainly feel like that was still part of my path, was to get really inspired by scientific research and to go out and do that, and then that eventually led me to do what I'm doing now. So I think it's still, it's all part of the path, and those summer experiences that Brown can give you are really valuable.
I had a similar experience with research. I think that played a big role in me being able to then make a career shift when I reached back to some mentors at Brown and said, how do you recommend I get into this field? Who can I talk to? That support was really amazing. And also about Brown's open curriculum and the ability to take very diverse, study very diverse things at the same time. I mean, no one's like, even later in life in our careers, like no one's saying just because you're doing this job doesn't mean you can't also freelance in this. So currently, like while working and developing software and education together, which is blending two things I find really interesting, I still do biomechanics research and collaborating with other colleagues who I've met over the years. There's certainly like no rules to what jobs you can have at the same time, only like the limit of attention you have to give things. So that, I think embracing that and knowing that like it's that embracing diverse interests and being able to pursue that in different ways is, at Brown that was amazing, and I still try to do that now.
So I didn't do any research, but the ability to study art history and do the pre-med stuff at the same time, I thought was pretty special, and not feel like I was overwhelmed by doing both. So I'd have to say that was pretty much most meaningful for me about Brown. But another thing that, because I do have the years on me, I have met more people since I've left Brown who are Brown alums than I knew people at Brown when I went to Brown. So your world is just going to get huger. I mean, you have access to alumni now, and I know that there's a lot of efforts now to connect students with alumni even more through the Career Connect, Brown Connect. But you're joining this club of amazing people out there who have a lot to offer. So you'll take advantage of it now, but you're going to continue to meet people who are connected to this community as you go out into the world. And I mean, I was at just at work, I've met people, whether it's patients or a patient comes in and tells me, oh, my husband went to Brown, and turned out he was in my class. So I mean, it's amazing how many people are out there, and there's this incredible connection that you have. I mean, I love the word, using the word connection, because there's this bond that you have with everyone who has ever gone here, and it's really quite special, and you can leverage that. You can take advantage of that. I think we need to give you guys some time to talk before we run out of time. So I'm wondering if anyone's got a question for us. Okay.
Yeah, what's the most boring part of your job?
Boring. Gosh. For me, it's billing.
I agree with that. Yeah. I don't get a lot of personal satisfaction out of sending invoices to people, so.
Yeah, I mean, document management is part of, you have to sort out tax opinions, create folder structures, little things like that. You just, it's just part of it, what you have to do day to day. I'd say there's sometimes boring analyses I have to do too, it's just something I'm not that interested in, but, we have to solve some question that is more about kind of internal facing subject matter rather than like external facing, like we're going to do this renewable energy investment, like that's the more exciting stuff. So internal facing stuff is a little bit less exciting for me.
Yeah, invoices, taxes, travel reimbursements, any kind of receipts, like sending a receipt, all that stuff. Also, email can be kind of tedious now. I feel like my inbox is just getting like bigger and bigger and bigger. I think just because people do more and more stuff by email now. So yeah, administrative stuff.
Yeah, definitely sometimes email for sure. I also have to do, because we have like a lot of files that we work with, I have to do a lot of sorting those files on various drives and backing up files. So that definitely takes a chunk out of your day and sort of can be very tedious for sure.
Yeah, I echo everything else they said. And then like data, like some analyses that you have to do that just like, well, I know I need this information, I know I need this data point, but it's just boring and it just takes time. So And then definitely emails, but what I will say though is like don't underestimate like the time that it takes to write emails, even for informational interviews, because that stuff takes so much time sometimes. And then you're just like, okay, I'm just gonna send this quick email to ask to talk to someone, and it'll take you 5 minutes sometimes. So just don't underestimate. Or longer.
Yeah.
Or longer. So.
The first few times take longer.
And also on the flip side of that, if you're asking an alum for an informational interview, give them a few days to answer you. You know, I know you're excited and everything, but
You're not as excited?
that inbox, you know. That was a good question.
Yeah.
Yep.
So all of you seem to have like pursued a secondary interest that's related to science, but not, totally like exactly science. And I was wondering how many of you sort of have graduate degrees in that second thing, or like how did you decide whether to go to grad school or just to get that experience on the job, sort of like, how did you decide to pursue?
So I went to business school, and I think that was honestly what helped me figure that out was I talked to a lot of Brown alums, both in my class, both my friends of friends, and also just reaching out through Brunette. And it definitely helps because I had no idea what business school actually entailed. I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know how the application process worked at all. So all of that stuff I had to learn from my friends. And even just as a side note, because we were talking about like help from Brown and what people have supported you, I think the major things are like some of my best friends came from Brown, and till this day, one of my friends who has a law degree, he's the one who's helped me like perfect my resume. He read through my essays for business school, so I think that just don't underestimate the friends that you're also making here too, because you can touch base with a lot of them. And I think it's just a matter of gaining the information through research and through talking to other people.
I have not gone to graduate school, and I'm not 100% sure I will. If I did go to graduate school, I think a large portion of the desire for me to do that would be to gain some extra skills. So I actually try while I'm, just outside of like a structured school system to teach myself skills and to take classes just like in my spare time and skills that I want to acquire anyway. So if, down the line, if I wanted to go to graduate school, I would want it to be for something like outside of just acquiring skills. I would want it to be for like more of like giving myself time to work on projects or to acquire an entirely new skill set that I needed to completely switch something over to.
I went to journalism school right after Brown and did a 1-year master's. Honestly, I did it because it seemed like the easiest choice. Like, I didn't know much about journalism, and I wanted to be kind of like taught how to break into the field. The only reason I could do it though is because it was a full scholarship and a stipend for teaching. So I always tell people now, most journalism schools, you end up with like 70 grand in debt, and journalism is not a lucrative profession at the beginning, and so I really don't think it's worth it for journalism for most people.
Yeah, I'm taking classes now actually. So Wells Fargo pays. A lot of big companies do this. They'll pay for you to take a certain amount of classes every year. So I'm picking up some of those skills through those additional classes I'm taking while I'm working. Mostly just learning on the job though, and that's the same thing in my previous company. It was a startup, so everybody was learning, so that was more normal. Wells Fargo less so, not exactly a startup. But yeah, that's basically it. I might go to grad school at some point, but I think a lot of doing an MBA, which is probably what I would do, is about, a lot of the value can be pivoting toward to get into an industry, break in somewhere that you haven't worked historically, don't have the experience for, and right now I'm kind of where I want to be, so there's not much motivation to do that.
I worked in a research lab for 4 years. That was primarily graduate students, but never entered a program there. So looking back on it, spending 4 years doing research where like you could get a PhD, maybe if you spend just 1 more year. But the biggest difference for me was the ability to jump from project to project and explore different interests while being there. So I would say, I guess the hurdle or the reason I never entered a PhD program or wanted to apply to enter one was not feeling like I found the particular project that I wanted to focus on, similar to like echoes and things that have already been said, not finding that particular interest that I wanted to just sit down and focus on for a long time. So instead, when I thought about acquiring different skills, I would audit. I was in Providence, so I found professors, audited some classes with them, entered some online courses, and through other mentors and other friends, just worked on acquiring that stuff independently. But did consider and master's programs, and saw other friends who use master programs as a way to switch from field to field. And I guess that comes down to some personal decisions when it comes time to do it.
So I got my master's in healthcare management through an executive program at the Harvard School of Public Health, and came to the point where I felt like I needed both a little bit more of sort of pedigree, if you will, another couple of letters to help me just be recognized as being serious about being a leader in healthcare. I think my actions and my role that I was given as a medical director by that point sort of showed that I was that. But I think in the system that I was working in, I felt, maybe right or wrong, that it was necessary to do that, and I really wanted to learn more about it. I was very fortunate in being able to do it when I did it, and with 2 young kids, and still being able to see patients, and being able to carve out time just to study, just to learn, to do cases, and write papers again, and be with a group of peers who were also, in similar situations. For me, I used to say it was the most self-indulgent thing I've ever done, because it was mid-career, and I just got to stop and not completely stop, because I still kept the job, but just pause and take some time that was just for self-enrichment. And I think it's nice to be able to do that if you can, but education comes in so many different ways and different forms, as we've heard. Other questions?
It only applies to half the degrees, but does being a female in the field actually affect any part of your career?
Yes.
That's a loaded question. I don't know what angle you want us to answer it, but I think that for me, especially working with a lot of engineers, there are obviously still less females in the field in engineering. So I think in terms of the biases that you're going to be facing, that can be difficult. I think that in general, and that this is also just like any bias or discrimination in general, I think what really helps is just having the self-confidence in yourself and knowing what you're talking about. Because I think that some of these preconceptions or these preconceived notions that people have of you, that can easily change given one conversation, given working with them over time. So I think that, I don't know if that's going to answer your question, but that's the angle I'm just responding.
I'm sure that it does, but I've been very lucky in that in the job that I hold right now, my 2 other coworkers are both women also, so I have a really good network of women in my specific field doing video production, which is not common. I know that like most of the people in the film industry that I know are men, and especially in documentary, I think that there's a growing community of women who do it, but it's still overwhelmingly dominated by men. But I've been very lucky to have a lot of women that I can work with, and so that I don't feel that that has affected me that much. But that could change if I were to move to a sort of like more male-dominated work area. But for now, I feel like I'm really lucky.
Yeah, I have to say I don't think about it very much. The last time I really thought about it was when I didn't want to go into science, because I think being a woman in like a traditional science research, PhD, tenure track path is very difficult. And I know now after being a science writer and talking to scientists over the last 9 years, it's exceedingly difficult if you want to have a family. So I'm just kind of, in science writing, I never think about it. I don't think there's any kind of, if anything, I think there's more women than men.
With that said, I also take advantage of any of the women-specific seminars or any of the like Society of Women Engineers and Women's Network within a company. Like those things, they have a lot of panels and they have a lot of discussion sessions. So I mean, it's a constant conversation. It depends on how deep you want to talk about it, but there are a lot of associations that are specific to women's professional growth too.
Wow. Yeah, there have been many times when I felt like being a woman in medicine was challenging, but it's and because of that, early on, I started reading everything I could get my hands on about women in leadership, not limited to medicine. So I have a bookshelf filled with women in leadership and the differences between the genders in terms of leadership, and just dove into it, and then found that there were some little mini courses about women in leadership and women leadership in medicine, and pursued that for many years. And that preceded my going for my master's degree. But learning about it and learning about the differences and the benefits, I think I told some of you earlier that when the CEO turned to me and said, you know, do you want to be chief medical officer of this hospital? My first reaction was, you know, holy moly, I've never done this before. I don't know how to do this. And that's a very female response, to say, no, I don't want to do it because I don't know how to do it or I've never done it before. Whereas a typical, and I'm stereotyping, but the literature supports this, that men will often say, sure, what the heck, I'll go for it. Why not? So I paused and I said, which person do I want to be? And, you know, do I want this opportunity or not? There are a lot of layers to it. But I really struggled and said, I'm not going to give that response my go-to response, which would be, no, I'm not ready. I'd like to try this, you know, this other job first and then work my way to that. No, I dove in, and, you know, it was a learning experience. Do I regret it? Not entirely, but it was forcing myself to learn what I learned about women in leadership roles and go out of my comfort zone in a very, very big way. Any other questions? Not a one, everyone.
So now you know everything.
I think, you know, our lives are journeys, and we can't, I think the point that was made that you know, most of us, you may think you know what you're going to be when you grow up, but, and I still don't know what I'm going to be when I grow up, and I'm still not finished. I know I'll evolve in many different roles as I go forward. You know, the most important thing is to try to focus on what you want to do next as opposed to what you want to do forever. And that's the best advice I can give you is just focus on what's next and how to make what's next meaningful in the context of what you enjoy doing, what you know about yourself, what you're interested in, and not focus on, you know, down the road. I think you've heard that from almost everybody. No one's dead set on what they're going to be doing, what job we're going to be retiring from. I'm not sure that the job I'm doing now is the job I'm going to retire from. And I'm open to that. And I think that's important. I think that's one of the messages I've heard here in the themes.
Yeah, I think to go off that also, I would say Brown already tells you to do this, but to challenge yourselves to take some classes in some areas that you wouldn't otherwise take them in, but not just any classes. I was going to take some practical classes. Like I took one econ course when I was at Brown, and you know, going back, of course, it's partially because now I'm in finance, but you know, I wish I'd taken some more. And I would say that there's such high turnover now in the job market for us that it's just useful to have sort of a broader set of knowledge. So I would encourage. I know it's easy at Brown to like kind of take the classes you really are excited about, which is what I did. But you know, take an accounting class, take another econ class, because you don't know where you're going to end up, and it's nice to have some of that knowledge base.
I think also one more thing, what Jill said about self-reflection is important now, but it's also important every time, like wherever you are in your career, like what the corollary of risk taking is recognizing when you're not happy or when you didn't make the right decision, and then course correcting and changing. You know, there's no shame in like trying to change paths to make yourself more comfortable or happy.
And you don't learn, you don't know unless you do it, right? You can't self-reflect, you can't figure out what you want to do unless, like you were saying before, unless you actually go out there and go to that panel that you weren't sure about, or go listen to that speaker that you actually have no interest in international affairs, but you just want to go, so.
Yeah, I think to those two things, and this is something that's changed recently, I think, from maybe it was starting like in, I don't know exactly when, but now the online courses from other universities are also really huge. So I think one thing to maximize while you're at Brown is to recognize what's like truly unique about Brown and like access to professors and events going on campus. Whereas like there's always opportunities, and I think everyone said this today, a lot of opportunities to learn a lot of different things in ways outside of Brown, but focusing on like the professors here that are really unique, your classmates who you'll form relationships with that'll probably last a really long time. I mean, that's certainly been true for me too. I think that's one thing I would try to focus on.
Great. Well, I want to thank our panel for their sharing